Okay, so you know how we always ask you to send in the stuff that really gets you thinking?
Yeah, the stuff that just makes you stop and go, huh, I never thought about it like that before.
Exactly. Well, you guys really outdid yourselves this time. Someone sent us this blog post
Oh, yeah.
from April 2nd, 2025,
Mm-hmm.
with this really long title.
Oh, yeah, I remember this one. 2025's 0402, Raja the Hofi, new scene.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, for those of you who don't speak Mandarin, that's basically Rodri's prayer diary, giving oneself wholly to God for a lifetime of service in the tabernacle. And
Oh, yeah.
it's a deep one.
It really is. It's fascinating, though, how he starts from this, very specific passage from the Bible.
Right.
And it's personal reflection, too. But
Yeah.
he manages to pull out these, like, really profound, almost universal principles about what it means to be dedicated, what it means to serve. I mean, that's something we can all connect with, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So, today we're going to be diving into Rodri's take on a passage from the book of Numbers, specifically Numbers 8.14-26, which talks about the Levites, and their role in the tabernacle. Now, Rodri starts off by highlighting this idea of being set apart, chosen.
Yeah, and this is really crucial, right? The Levites were specifically selected, separated even, you could say, for a very particular purpose.
Right.
And Rogering hones in on this verse, Numbers 8.14, where it says, "Thus you shall separate the Levites from among the children of Israel, and the Levites shall be mine." Like this act of separation is so central to his whole interpretation.
Yeah, and it wasn't just about being chosen, right? I
Right.
mean, there were rituals involved, purification ceremonies, even being presented as a wave offering.
Right, exactly. And what Rodri finds really interesting here is that it wasn't a one and done kind of thing. Like
Yeah.
you get purified, you get presented, and boom, you're good to go. He sees it as this ongoing process, like the need for holiness, for purity. It has to be maintained throughout your service. It's not just about being selected, it's about actively living up to that calling, constantly renewing that dedication through your action.
Absolutely. So not just a state of being, but an active way of life.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the title of the blog post itself, right? Giving oneself wholly. Rodri digs into the meaning of this phrase in Numbers 8.1 stand. The verse says, "For they are wholly given to me from among the children of Israel. Instead of all who open the womb, the firstborn of all the children of Israel, I have taken them for myself." Now, how does he break down this idea of being completely given?
He makes this, I think, really fascinating distinction, and it's a subtle one, but it's important. He says it applies on two levels. So, first, to Levites as a whole. The entire tribe was dedicated to God, right?
Well,
But then, second, to each individual Levite. Like each
yeah.
person within that tribe had to commit their entire life, their entire being, without holding anything back to God's work. So you have this like double emphasis on the totality of the commitment. It's all encompassing on both a collective and an individual level.
Right, like a group dedication, but also this individual responsibility.
Hmm.
And this ties into them being chosen as replacements for the firstborn of Israel, right? Could you maybe explain that connection a little bit more?
Sure. So the firstborn, especially in that ancient cultural context, they represented like the best, right?
Hmm.
The first fruits, the prime, the most vital part. And when God chose the Levites to, take their place, in a way, it's like saying that we should also be giving our best to God, like not just whatever's left over, not just our spare time or energy, but our prime offerings, so to speak. It's a really high standard. Yeah.
It is. It's about prioritizing and really giving the best of yourself. Um, Rodri also mentions the historical context behind all of this, right? Like how God had initially claimed the firstborn during that whole plague situation in Egypt.
Exactly. And I think he brings that up to remind us of the bigger picture here, the
Okay.
story of redemption. God had claimed the firstborn as his own back then, and now by choosing the Levites to serve in the tabernacle, it's like he's affirming this desire for a people, a community that's fully dedicated to him.
Okay, so we've got the Levites. They're set apart. They're wholly given. They're standing in for the firstborn.
Hmm.
But what did they actually do? Like, what were their day-to-day responsibilities in the tabernacle?
So basically they were given as this gift to Aaron and his sons, who were
Yeah.
the priests, right? And their main job was to make everything run smoothly, to do all the practical tasks that facilitated the relationship between God and the Israelites. This included things like setting up the tabernacle, taking it down, transporting it whenever they moved. They were also involved in atonement, which, to put it simply, means making things right with God, restoring that connection when it's been broken.
So, like the essential support system that took care of the logistics so the priest could focus on the the more, spiritual aspects.
Exactly. And Rodri points out that this was also really important for maintaining the sanctity of the tabernacle. You couldn't just have anyone wandering in, especially if they weren't ritually pure. The Levites acted as a kind of buffer, making sure everything was done according to, the proper procedures and protocols.
So specific tasks, like what kind of things were they doing on a daily basis?
Well, the blog post specifically mentions the heavier tasks, like physically moving the tabernacle whenever the Israelites were on the move. Imagine, dismantling and reassembling this huge tent-like structure every time they journeyed.
Right.
And they were also responsible for managing the sacrificial offerings, handling the animals, preparing all the materials needed for worship, that sort of thing. And all of this had to be done under the direction of the priests. Everything was very organized, very hierarchical. But what's interesting is that Rodri also highlights how the Israelites as a whole, they accepted this arrangement. Like they understood and respected the different roles that God had assigned to different groups.
Right. So it was a system that everyone bought into. Now, was this just like a free-for-all in terms of service? Like, did everyone just do whatever they wanted?
Not at all. Actually, the scripture laid out these specific age ranges for different levels of service, and Rodri spends a lot of time reflecting on this. So, initially, the text mentions that Levites would begin their full active service at age 30. But Rodri points out that if you look at other parts of the Old Testament, it seems like they actually started around age 25.
Interesting.
But with a catch. For the first 5 years, they were basically apprentices. They had to learn the ropes from the more seasoned Levites.
So like on-the-job training, but for serving God.
Exactly. Rodri sees this as a really crucial period of preparation, where they would learn the practical skills, the knowledge, the rituals, everything they needed to know to do their job effectively. Then, from age 30 to 50, that's when they would be in their prime, so to speak, doing all the heavier tasks, the more demanding stuff.
And what happened after 50? Like, did they just stop serving completely?
Well, the scripture says they would retire from the heavy labor. So, yeah, they wouldn't be out there, hauling the tabernacle around or anything like that. But that doesn't mean their service ended. Instead, they transitioned into more supervisory roles. They would oversee things, guard the tabernacle, and, really importantly, they would train the younger generation of Levites. So it was all about passing on their knowledge, their experience, making sure the tradition continued.
That's beautiful, actually. It's like this lifelong commitment. But the nature of the service changes and evolves as you get older.
Exactly. And for Rodri, this is one of the key takeaways. The Levites dedicated their entire lives, from their early adulthood to their old age, to serving God in the tabernacle. But it wasn't static, it was dynamic. They were always finding ways to contribute, to give back.
I mean, that's an incredible model, right? But Rodri's writing this in 2025, and it's a personal prayer diary. So how does he connect this ancient idea to his own life, his ministry in the 21st century?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. He takes this idea of the tabernacle, right? And he says it doesn't just have to be this physical structure. It can be any area of our lives where we're serving God, where we're dedicating ourselves to his purposes. It could be our work, our relationships, our creative pursuits, whatever it is that we feel called to do.
Okay, that's really cool. So where does his own tabernacle lie? What's he focused on?
In the blog post, he specifically mentions his morning prayer training. He refers to it as Shene, which is Mandarin, and it basically refers to this structured approach to prayer and discipleship that he leads. It sounds like it involves a lot of teaching, guidance, and communal prayer. Like he's really trying to help people cultivate a deeper connection with God through a disciplined practice of prayer.
So for him, that's his way of serving, of giving back. And he mentions a shift in his approach, doesn't he?
Yes, he talks about how in the past, he was very focused on direct mentorship, like he was personally guiding a lot of individuals. But now he's realizing that he can't do it all alone. He needs to train others, people he calls watchers, to help carry on the work. So he's moving away from that direct mentorship model and focusing more on equipping these watchers to become leaders, mentors themselves.
Wow, it's almost like he's mirroring the transition we saw in the Levites, right?
Absolutely. It's that same shift from the hands-on work to more of an oversight role, training and equipping others to continue the legacy. And he even mentions praying for strength and wisdom in this new phase of his ministry, just like those older Levites who continued to serve in different ways, sharing their experience, guiding the next generation.
And he mentions these 3 indicators of discipleship, too. What are those about?
Right. So he says he wants to equip these watchers with these 3 indicators, which he calls Youth in Mandarin. Unfortunately, he doesn't elaborate on what they are in this particular blog post, but it sounds like a practical framework he uses to help people assess their own spiritual growth. Like, how are they doing? Are they progressing? Are they living out their faith in a meaningful way?
So essentially, all these principles from the book of Numbers about being set apart, being wholly given, serving in different ways throughout your life, it's not just ancient history to Rodri. It's a living model for how to live out your faith in the 21st century.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what's so powerful about his reflection is that it shows how these ancient models of devotion, they can still resonate with us today. They can still inspire us, guide us, challenge us to think about how we're dedicating our lives, how we're serving God, and how we're passing on the torch to others. It's a really, really powerful message.
It really is.
Yeah.
So just to recap for everyone, this deep dive into Rodri's blog post has brought up some pretty huge themes, right? We talked about the Lehites, how they were chosen, separated, constantly striving for holiness in their service.
Right, and how that idea of being wholly given, it applies on both a collective and an individual level. We're called to dedicate not just our spare time, but our best efforts, our first fruits to God's work.
And we also looked at their specific responsibilities, how they were organized, how everyone respected this system, this divine order.
And of course, the different stages of service, that transition from being an apprentice to doing the heavy lifting, to taking on more of a leadership role, passing on the knowledge, ensuring that the service continues.
And what's so cool is how Rodri connects all this to his own life. Like he's showing us that this idea of a tabernacle, it can be anything. It's any area where we're serving, where we're dedicating ourselves to something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, and he's living proof that our roles, our ways of serving, they can change and evolve over time, just like the Levites. It's all about finding those new ways to contribute, to give back, to use our gifts and our experience to make a difference.
So as we wrap up here, we want to leave you with this question.
Hmm.
What's your tabernacle? Where do you feel called to serve? And what does it mean for you to be wholly given, to offer your best in every season of your life? It's something worth thinking about for sure. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We hope you found it as insightful as we did.